My son sat on a park bench in a $3,000 Italian suit, eating a $1 hot dog, while my grandson slept on a pile of luggage. When I pulled my rusted Ford truck up to the curb, Leo looked at me with eyes that had died hours ago. He said Dad Conrad fired me. He said our bloodline was too dirty for his brand. I did not offer a hug. I did not offer a tissue. I simply unlocked the passenger door and said, "Get in the car." It was time Conrad Blackwood learned that you do not judge a building by its paint, but by the steel in its foundation. Before I tell you how I brought a billion-dollar empire to its knees with a single signature, let me know which city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who you are. The Tuesday afternoon sun in Central Park was not warm. It was the kind of sharp, blinding light that exposes every flaw, every crack in the pavement, and every failure. I sat in my truck, the engine idling with a rough cough that I had been meaning to fix for weeks. Through the windshield, the image of my son broke something inside my chest. Leo was 32 years old. He was a brilliant architect, a man who could look at empty space and see a cathedral. But right now, slumped on that bench, he looked like a child who had been left behind at a bus stop. Beside him, two large suitcases were stacked haphazardly. My 7-year-old grandson Toby was curled up against them, using his father's coat as a blanket. I did not honk. I turned off the ignition and stepped out. The heavy thud of my work boots on the concrete made Leo look up. He tried to smile, but his face crumpled. He stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in his suit jacket, a reflex of the manners he had learned in a world that just chewed him up. "Dad," he whispered, "I didn't think you would get here so fast." I walked past him and picked up Toby. The boy was heavy solid, smelling of grape juice and city exhaust. He stirred but didn't wake. I carried him to the truck and strapped him into the back seat. Then I turned to the luggage. "Get the bags, Leo." Leo hesitated. "Dad, I can't go to your place. It is too small. Monica will be furious if she finds out I took Toby to a workshop. She says the sawdust triggers his allergies." I grabbed the handle of the largest suitcase and threw it into the truck bed with a metallic crash. "Monica is not part of this conversation anymore, Leo. Get in the truck." He looked at me, then at the park, then at the empty street. He had nowhere else to go. He nodded, defeated, and climbed into the passenger seat. As I merged back into the aggressive New York traffic, the silence in the cab was thick enough to choke on. My truck smelled of cedar old coffee and gasoline. It was the smell of work. Leo sat with his hands folded in his lap, staring at his manicured fingernails. "Why, Leo?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. He took a shaky breath. "Conrad called me into his office at 9 this morning. I thought we were discussing the Summit Tower project. I had just finished the final blueprints. Instead, he had security waiting. He told me that my aesthetic was too pedestrian. He said the board feels that the Blackwood brand needs a legacy face, someone with pedigree." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Pedigree." He said my bloodline wasn't worthy. Leo's voice cracked. He actually used those words, Dad. He said, "Leo, you are a good draftsman, but you have the soul of a laborer. We need kings, not bricklayers." Then he told me Monica had already filed the papers. They took the apartment key. They took my company ID. They gave me an hour to pack my personal effects. I listened to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. Conrad Blackwood, the man who wore silk scarves in July. The man who claimed his family came over on the Mayflower. I remembered 30 years ago when Conrad was just a desperate developer with a plot of swampland in New Jersey and no one to drain it. I was the one who brought the pumps. I was the one who fronted the logistics when the banks laughed at him. But I had done it through shell companies, through intermediaries. To Conrad, I was just Gus, the reliable contractor who retired to a shack. He forgot, I said quietly. Forgot what Leo asked. He forgot that bricklayers are the ones who build the walls he hides behind. I drove north, leaving the steel skyline of the city behind, for the winding roads of upstate. My home was not a mansion. It was a converted barn on 5 acres of woodland. To the naked eye, it was a humble retirement spot for a man with a bad back and a small pension. But beneath the floorboards of my workshop in a fireproof safe lay the deeds to half the industrial parks on the eastern seaboard. I had built king infrastructure from a single dump truck into a logistics empire, then handed the reins to a board of directors so I could finally rest. I wanted Leo to make his own way, to build his own name without the shadow of my money. Perhaps that had been my mistake. I had let him walk into a den of wolves wearing nothing but good intentions. We pulled into my gravel driveway as the sun began to set. The cabin looked warm, the yellow light from the porch welcoming. But the peace was shattered the moment we stepped out of the truck. Leo's phone buzzed. Then it dinged. Then it vibrated again. A relentless assault of notifications. He pulled it out, and his face went pale. "Oh God. What is it, Bank of America?" he stammered. "Account frozen. Chase, account frozen. My credit cards, all of them, declined." I walked over and looked at the screen. The notifications were rolling in like a ticker tape of disaster. Then a text message popped up at the top. It was from Monica. It read, "The Range Rover is company property leased under Blackwood Development. I see via GPS you are at your father's hovel. A recovery team is 5 minutes out. Do not make this difficult, Leo. Leave the keys on the hood." Leo looked up at me, panic rising in his throat. "Dad, how are we going to feed Toby? I have $80 in my wallet. That is it. They took everything." Before I could answer, headlights swept across the trees. A flatbed tow truck with the logo of a repo agency backed aggressively into my driveway, blocking my Ford. The driver, a large man with a cigarette dangling from his lip, didn't even step out. He just rolled down the window. "Range Rover. Plate number KNG 882, keys, now." Leo looked at the luxury SUV he had driven here. It was the last symbol of the life he thought he had. Inside, Toby's car seat was still strapped in the back. "Wait," Leo pleaded, rushing forward. "My son's car seat is in there. Let me get it out." The driver checked his watch. "You got 2 minutes before I hook it up with or without the seat." I stood on the porch, leaning against the wooden railing. I could have stopped this. I could have walked into my workshop, opened the safe, and bought the tow truck company over the phone before the driver finished his cigarette. But Leo needed to see this. He needed to feel the cold, hard texture of rock bottom. I watched my son, a man who had designed skyscrapers, fumble with the latches of a child's car seat. His hands were shaking. The plastic clips were stubborn. He was sweating despite the chill. The repo man revved his engine impatiently, blasting a cloud of diesel smoke into the air. "Hurry up, buddy," the driver yelled. Leo yanked the seat free, stumbling back onto the gravel. He held the car seat to his chest like a shield. He looked small. He looked stripped of dignity. The driver didn't say thank you. He hooked the SUV, lifted it into the air, and dragged it away, leaving deep ruts in my gravel driveway. Leo stood there, in the cloud of dust, holding the empty seat. The silence returned to the woods, but it was heavy now. "Come inside, Leo," I said, my voice low and steady. He turned to me, tears finally spilling over. "Dad, I am sorry. I am so sorry. I let them treat me like this. I let them treat you like this. Monica was right. I am nothing." I walked down the steps and placed a hand on his shoulder. My hand was rough, calloused, stained with walnut oil. His shoulder was covered in fine Italian wool. "You are not nothing," I told him. "You are just waking up." I took the car seat from him and set it on the porch swing. Then I looked him in the eye. "Conrad Blackwood thinks he cut off your supply line. He thinks he can starve you out, because he controls the banks you use. But he made a tactical error. Leo wiped his face. What error? I turned and looked at the empty driveway where the repo truck had just left. He forgot to check who owns the road he's driving on. I opened the door to the cabin. Inside, the smell of sawdust was strong and clean. Go wash your face. Feed Toby. I have a phone call to make. Who are you calling? Leo asked, stepping into the warmth. You canceled your landline years ago. I didn't answer him. I walked past the kitchen, past the living room, and went straight to the heavy oak door at the back of the house, the door to my workshop. I entered and locked it behind me. I didn't reach for a hammer or a saw. I knelt down and pulled up the loose floorboard under the workbench. There, nestled in foam, was a satellite phone and a black notebook that hadn't been opened in 10 years. I dialed a number that I knew by heart. It rang once. Mitchell, I said into the receiver. The voice on the other end gasped. Mr. King, is that you? It is Augustus, I corrected him. My voice dropping an octave, shedding the persona of the retired carpenter. Initiate the winter protocol. I want a full audit on Blackwood Development's debt structure by sunrise. But Sir Mitchell stammered. You have been dormant for a decade. If we do this, the market will know the king is back. Let them know, I said, watching the dust motes dance in the moonlight. Conrad Blackwood just declared war on my family. He wants to talk about bloodlines, fine. I am going to show him exactly what my blood is made of. The morning sun did not bring warmth to the cabin. It only brought the harsh reality of what we had to do. I watched my son stand in front of the cracked mirror in the hallway, trying to steam the wrinkles out of his suit jacket, with a travel iron he had salvaged from his luggage. He looked like a man preparing for his own execution, not a job interview. He was 32 years old, a father, a brilliant architect, yet his hands trembled as he adjusted his tie. I sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of black coffee, the smell of sawdust and old pine surrounding us. I wanted to tell him that a suit does not make the man, but I stayed silent. In his world, the world of glass towers and boardrooms, appearance was the only currency that mattered, and right now Leo was bankrupt. We drove into the city in my truck. The suspension groaned over every pothole, a stark contrast to the air-suspended silence of the luxury SUV he was used to. I dropped him off 2 blocks away from the offices of Davies and Ross, a boutique firm known for ethical design. Leo insisted on walking the rest of the way so no one would see him stepping out of a rusted Ford F-150. I parked and followed him at a distance, pulling my cap down low. I needed to see this. I needed to know if the rot had spread as deep as I feared. I sat in the lobby pretending to read a 3-year-old magazine while Leo went behind the glass doors to meet with Mr. Davies. Through the blinds, I could see the silhouette of the interview. It started well. I saw Leo open his portfolio. I saw Davies lean in, his body language shifting from skeptical to engaged. Leo was talking with his hands tracing lines in the air, describing structures that defied gravity. For a moment, I saw my son come alive again. He was in his element, building worlds out of nothing. I saw Davies nod. He smiled. He extended a hand across the desk. It looked like a deal. It looked like salvation. Then the receptionist's phone rang. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the quiet hum of the office. She picked it up, listened for a second, and her eyes widened. She looked toward the glass office where Leo was shaking hands. She pressed a button on her console, interrupting the meeting. I saw Davies pause. He looked annoyed at the interruption, but he picked up the receiver on his desk. I watched the color drain from Mr. Davies's face. It happened in seconds. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of confusion, then fear, and finally cold resolve. He hung up the phone slowly. He did not look at Leo the same way anymore. He looked at him the way you look at a contagion. Leo was still smiling, still holding the pen ready to fill out the paperwork. Davies stood up and pulled the portfolio away from Leo's reach. I could not hear the words through the glass, but I could read the lips. I could read the body language of rejection. Davies pointed to the door. Leo stood up confused, his palms open in a gesture of pleading. He was asking why. Davies didn't answer. He just pointed again, more aggressively this time. Leo walked out of the glass office, his shoulders slumped so low, they looked broken. He passed the receptionist, who turned her chair away to avoid making eye contact. When he stepped into the lobby, he looked like he had been physically beaten. "They know," Leo whispered as he walked past me. I stood up and followed him out onto the sidewalk. The city noise was deafening, but Leo's silence was louder. "What did he say?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Leo stopped at the corner, staring at the traffic light. He said, "I am on the list, Dad. The unspoken list." He said he received a call from the Builders Association. They told him that if he hires me, his firm will lose their bonding insurance. They said, "I am under investigation for corporate espionage and embezzlement." Embezzlement. I repeated the word, tasting the bile in it. Conrad was not just firing him. He was salting the earth so nothing could ever grow again. Leo turned to me, his eyes red. He said, "I am a liability." He said, "No firm in the city will touch me. Conrad has flagged my license." "Dad, I studied for 7 years. I worked 80-hour weeks. And in one phone call, it is all gone. I am not an architect anymore. I am toxic waste." I looked at the skyscraper across the street, a building I knew Conrad owned. He was up there somewhere, probably sipping sparkling water, feeling powerful because he had crushed a man who wouldn't fight back. But he had forgotten one thing. When you strip a man of everything he has to lose, you do not make him weak. You make him dangerous. "Get in the truck." "Leo," I said. "Where are we going?" "To the unemployment office." "No," I said, opening the passenger door that creaked in protest. "We are going to the one place Conrad cannot reach. We are going to school." Leo looked at me confused. "School?" "You learned how to draw buildings," I said, starting the engine. "Now you are going to learn how to own them." As we drove away, leaving the rejection behind, I saw Leo loosen his tie and throw it on the dashboard. It was a surrender of his old life. The blacklist was real. The walls were closing in. But what Conrad didn't know was that he had just trapped a tiger in a corner, and he had given the key to the only man who knew how to unlock the cage. The job hunt was over. The war had just begun. The silence in the truck was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of my tires on the asphalt. Leo was staring out the window, watching the city blur into a gray smear of concrete and indifference. He had just lost his career, but the universe was not done with us yet. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was not a number I recognized, but the area code belonged to the zip code where tuition cost more than my annual pension. It was St. Benedict's Academy, the prestigious prep school, where my grandson Toby was supposed to be learning how to be a gentleman. I put it on speaker. The voice on the other end was clipped nasal and dripping with disdain. It was Headmaster Sterling. "Mr. King," the voice said, not asking, but announcing. "We require you to come to the academy immediately. There has been an incident involving Tobias. We have already attempted to reach his father, but the number seems to be disconnected." Leo flinched. He had forgotten that his phone plan was part of the corporate package Conrad had canceled. "Is he hurt?" I asked, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "He is physically unharmed," Sterling replied, as if that was the least important detail. "However, his behavior is completely unacceptable. He has violated the core code of conduct. We are initiating an immediate expulsion. Please come and collect him and his belongings. Do not make us call the authorities." The line went dead. Leo looked at me, terror replacing the despair in his eyes. "Toby. Expelled Dad. He is 7. He is the gentlest kid in his class. He brings spiders outside instead of squishing them." What could he possibly have done? I didn't answer. I just pressed my foot down on the gas pedal. The old Ford roared its engine, complaining as I pushed it past the speed limit. We were going to find out. When we pulled up to the wrought iron gates of St. Benedict's, the security guard hesitated. He looked at my rusted truck, then at the line of polished Range Rovers and Teslas waiting to pick up children. I didn't wait for him to open the gate. I leaned out the window and stared at him until he felt the weight of 30 years of construction site authority. The gate buzzed open. I parked right in front of the administration building, taking up 2 spaces reserved for board members. Leo tried to smooth his hair, trying to summon some shred of dignity, but I walked ahead of him. I wasn't there to negotiate. I was there to extract my bloodline from a shark tank. We found Headmaster Sterling in his office, a room that smelled of old leather and hypocrisy. He was sitting behind a mahogany desk that cost more than my first house. He didn't stand up when we entered. He simply gestured to a chair in the corner. In that chair sat Toby. My grandson looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His school blazer was torn at the shoulder. His knee was scraped and bleeding through his uniform trousers. But it was his face that killed me. He wasn't crying. He was staring at the floor, his little hands gripping his knees so hard his knuckles were white. He looked exactly like Leo had looked on that park bench. Defeated. Leo rushed forward, dropping to his knees. "What happened? Are you okay?" Toby didn't answer. He just leaned into his father's chest and let out a small broken sob. Headmaster Sterling cleared his throat. He touched a file on his desk with the tip of his finger. Tobias attacked another student during recess. Unprovoked aggression. We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence, Mr. King, especially from students who, how should I put this, no longer fit the profile of our community. I stepped forward, my work boots leaving a dusty footprint on his Persian rug. Unprovoked, I asked, my voice low. "You are telling me that a boy who cries when he steps on an ant just decided to attack someone?" Sterling sighed, looking bored. "The details are irrelevant. The victim was Julian Thorne. His father is on the board of trustees, and coincidentally, a close business associate of Mr. Conrad Blackwood." I saw the ghost of a smile on Sterling's lips. It was a small, cruel twitch. Julian told the staff that Tobias was disrupting the peace. I turned to Toby. I put a hand on his back. "Toby, look at me." The boy looked up. His eyes were red, but there was fire in them too. A tiny spark of the king temper that skipped a generation. "Tell me the truth," I said. "What happened?" Toby sniffled. "Julian and his friends. They circled me by the swings. They had their phones out." "Go on," I said. "They said Grandpa Conrad told everyone that my daddy is a thief." Toby whispered, his voice trembling. "They said we are poor now. They said Daddy stole money and that's why we have to live in the woods," Julian said. "He said I smell like garbage because my blood is dirty." Leo froze. The room went deadly silent. Toby wiped his nose. I told him to stop. He pushed me down. He tore my coat. He said he was going to put a video of me crying on the internet so everyone could see the beggar boy. So I pushed him back. He fell in the mud. And then he started screaming for the teacher. I stood up slowly and turned to Sterling. The headmaster was suddenly very interested in a paperweight on his desk. So I said, my voice filling the room like concrete pouring into a mold. "You are expelling a 7-year-old for defending his father's honor against slander. You are expelling the victim of bullying because the bully's father writes you big checks." Sterling stood up, his face flushing pink. "Mr. King, watch your tone. The decision is made. Your tuition payments for the next semester have already been flagged as unreliable. We are simply accelerating the inevitable. This school is for the elite. We cannot have children here who bring instability." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "Instability," I repeated. "You think money makes you stable? You think this fancy office makes you a leader?" I walked over to the desk. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just leaned in close enough to smell his expensive cologne. You are not an educator, Mr. Sterling. You are a clerk, and you just made a very poor transaction. You think you are kicking us out? No. We are leaving. Because if I leave my grandson here for one more minute, he might learn that being a coward in a suit is better than being a man with a spine. I grabbed Toby's backpack. Let's go, Leo. We walked out of the office, leaving Sterling sputtering in our wake. As we crossed the playground, heads turned. The trophy mothers whispered behind their designer sunglasses. The nannies stared. I saw Julian Thorne, a chubby kid with a smug face, pointing at us and laughing with his friends. Toby shrank against my leg. They are looking at us, Grandpa. I stopped right in the middle of the courtyard. I knelt down so I was eye level with Toby. I didn't care who was watching. Let them look, I told him loud enough for the nearby parents to hear. Lift your head up, Toby. Look at them. Toby lifted his chin, tears still drying on his cheeks. Do you know why wolves don't worry about the opinion of sheep? I asked him. He shook his head. No. Because the sheep only know how to follow, I said, brushing the dirt off his torn blazer. You defended your family today. That is worth more than every diploma in this building. You are not dirty, Toby. You are a king. And kings don't bow to people who only have power because their daddies bought it for them. I stood up and took his hand. Leo took the other. We walked through the gates of St. Benedict's like we owned the place, not like we were being thrown out. As I put Toby into the truck, Leo looked at me. His sadness was starting to harden into something else, something useful. Anger, Dad, Leo said quietly. They went after my son. I started the engine, the roar of the exhaust drowning out the polite murmurs of the school pickup line. I know, I said, shifting into gear. And that is why we are not just going to beat them, Leo. We are going to bury them. Conrad wanted a war. He just drafted the soldiers that are going to end his reign. Now let's go home. I have a suit to get tailored, and you have an empire to reclaim. The sound of a Bentley engine is distinct. It does not roar like a truck or whine like a sedan. It purrs. It is a low, throaty hum designed to announce that money has arrived before the driver even steps out. I heard it coming up my gravel driveway, the tires crunching over stones that were never meant to touch Italian rubber. I did not look up from my workbench. I was hand-planing a piece of cherry wood, and the rhythm of the blade against the grain was the only piece I had left. The heavy oak door of my workshop did not open. It was shoved. Conrad Blackwood did not believe in knocking on doors he felt he could buy. He stepped into the dusty, sunlit space like a king entering a stable. He was wearing a navy pinstripe suit that probably cost more than the machinery in the room. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it to his nose, his eyes scanning the racks of chisels, the piles of lumber, and the fine layer of sawdust that coated everything. Augustus, he said. My name sounded like an insult in his mouth. I blew the shavings off the wood. I didn't turn around. You are trespassing, Conrad. The sign at the end of the road says private property. Conrad laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Private property implies value, Augustus. This is just squatting with permission. I am here to handle a pest problem. I finally turned. Conrad was standing near the entrance, careful not to let his polished shoes touch the thicker piles of sawdust. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. He saw an old man in flannel and denim hands stained with varnish. He did not see the man who had once signed the logistics contracts that allowed his first 3 skyscrapers to be built on time. Where is my son? I asked, leaning against the workbench. Conrad waved his hand dismissively. Probably crying in a corner, or looking for a job at a gas station. That is not why I am here. He walked forward, stepping gingerly over a coil of extension cords. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, creamy white envelope. He tossed it onto my workbench. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the wood until it hit a clamp. $50,000, Conrad said. Cash, untraceable. I looked at the envelope. It was thick. It represented a year of hard labor for a carpenter. It represented pocket change for Conrad. "What is this for?" I asked. Conrad smiled, showing teeth that had been whitened to an unnatural brightness. "It is a severance package, Augustus. For your family. I want Leo to sign the papers relinquishing full custody of Tobias to Monica. I want him to leave the state, and I want you to disappear." I picked up a rag and wiped my hands slowly. "You want to buy my grandson? I am saving him," Conrad corrected sharply. "Look around you, Gus. Look at this. Hovel. You live like a termite. You work with your hands. You sweat. Do you really think a boy with Blackwood blood belongs in a place like this? I am building a dynasty. The Summit Tower is just the beginning. Tobias is going to be the heir to an empire. He needs to be raised by kings, not by people who fix chairs for a living." I felt the anger rising in my chest, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. Anger is a fire. If you let it burn wild, it consumes you. If you control it, it drives the engine. I needed him to say more. I needed him to dig his own grave. I walked around the workbench, moving closer to him. I stopped at the corner of the table right above where I kept my grandfather's antique vise. "You think money makes a man a king?" I asked quietly. Conrad scoffed. "In this world, yes. Money is the only thing that separates the elite from the animals. Leo is weak. He has your softness. He wanted to design affordable housing. Can you imagine wasting prime real estate on the poor? I crushed him because I had to. It was a mercy killing for his career." I rested my hand on the edge of the workbench. My fingers brushed against the underside of the wood. There, held in place by a strip of duct tape, was a small digital voice recorder. I had activated it the moment I heard the Bentley in the driveway. It was a habit from my old life. Never enter a negotiation without a backup. I pressed the record button again to ensure the red light was steady. "So you admit it," I said, keeping my voice level. "You admitted to the blacklist. You admitted to bribing the school board to expel a 7-year-old boy just to hurt his father." Conrad stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive scotch and arrogance. "Of course I did. And I will do it again. I own the school board, Gus. I own the judges in family court. I own the bank that froze Leo's accounts. Do you understand who you are dealing with? I can snap my fingers and this shack will be condemned for code violations by tomorrow noon. I can make sure Leo never works as anything more than a janitor for the rest of his miserable life." He tapped his finger on the envelope. "Take the money. Take your son. Go to Florida. Go to Arizona. Just go somewhere where my grandson doesn't have to see you. Because if you stay, I will bury you under so much legal paperwork you won't be able to breathe." I looked at the envelope, then at Conrad. He was so confident. He thought he was the predator. He didn't realize he had just walked into a trap that had been set 10 years ago. I picked up the envelope. It felt heavy. Conrad smirked. "Smart man. Everyone has a price. Even a stubborn old mule like you." I weighed the envelope in my hand. Then I turned and tossed it into the wood-burning stove in the corner of the room. Conrad's eyes widened. "What are you doing? Are you insane?" The fire caught the paper. The flames licked at the edges of the envelope, turning the white paper brown, then black. $50,000 began to curl into ash. "I am not for sale, Conrad," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. "And neither is my family." Conrad stared at the fire, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. "You stupid old fool. You just burned your only lifeboat." "No," I said. "I just burned your leverage." Conrad backed away, shaking his head. "You will regret this. When the bulldozers come, don't say I didn't warn you. You are nothing, Gus. You are a footnote in my biography. A dusty old man in a dusty old shed." He turned and stormed out of the workshop. The door slammed shut, shaking the tools on the wall. I heard the Bentley start up the engine, revving aggressively as he tore back down the driveway, throwing gravel everywhere. I waited until the sound of the car faded into the distance. The silence returned to the workshop, smelling of smoke and victory. I reached under the workbench and peeled the tape back. I pulled out the small black recorder. The red light was still blinking. I pressed stop. I pressed play. Conrad's voice filled the room, clear and crisp. "I own the judges. I own the bank. I crushed him because I had to. It was a confession. It was a threat. It was the key to a prison cell." I slipped the recorder into my pocket. Conrad Blackwood thought he had just walked away from a defeated old man. He didn't know he had just handed the executioner his axe. I looked at the fire in the stove. The money was gone, but what I had in my pocket was worth more than $50,000. It was worth justice. I went back to my planing. The wood was rough, but under the surface the grain was straight and true. I would smooth it out, just like I was going to smooth out the mess Conrad had made of my family's life. One stroke at a time, one layer at a time, until the rot was gone and only the truth remained. The house was finally silent. Upstairs, Leo was sleeping the exhaustion of a man who had lost his identity, and Toby was dreaming whatever dreams a 7-year-old manages to find after being called dirty by his classmates. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the settling groans of the timber frame. I had built this cabin with my own hands to be a sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world could not reach me. But the world had not just reached me, it had kicked down my front door. I put down my coffee cup and walked out to the workshop. The air inside was cool and smelled of cedar and machine oil. For a decade, this room had been my therapy. Here I was, just Gus. I made rocking chairs. I fixed broken tables. I lived a simple life where the biggest problem was a knot in a piece of pine. Tonight, however, this wasn't a workshop. It was a staging ground. I walked to the far corner of the room, past the table saw and the drill press, to where I kept a large, disorganized pile of scrap lumber. To anyone else, it looked like a hoarding pile of reject wood destined for the stove. I began to move the planks. They were heavy, rough-hewn oak and walnut, but my muscles remembered the work. I stacked them aside until the concrete floor was bare. There was no handle. There was no digital keypad. I reached for a small magnetic tool I kept attached to the back of the bandsaw and placed it on a specific spot on the concrete. There was a dull, heavy click as the locking mechanism disengaged beneath the slab. I wedged a crowbar into the hairline crack and heaved. A square section of the floor, weighted with hydraulics, hissed open. A rush of stale, cold air hit my face. It was the smell of the past. I descended the narrow metal ladder into the darkness. I didn't turn on the overhead light. The glow from the workshop above was enough. This was a small, reinforced concrete bunker no larger than a walk-in closet. I had built it 20 years ago, not for the apocalypse, but for something far more likely, the day I might need to remind the world who I really was. Along the walls were rows of metal filing cabinets. They were not digital. Clouds can be hacked. Servers can be wiped. But paper is patient. Paper waits forever. I walked to the cabinet marked 1990 to 2005. The drawer slid open with a smooth, well-oiled glide. My fingers, calloused and stained with wood stain, danced over the manila folders. I wasn't looking for money. I had plenty of that buried in trusts and offshore accounts. I was looking for leverage. I was looking for the skeletons that the construction industry thought they had buried under layers of concrete. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. The cover was cracked with age. I opened it. Inside were the original loan agreements, the handshake deals, and the silent partnerships that had built the skyline of this city. And there, halfway through the book, was the file on Blackwood development. I ran my thumb over the pages. Conrad thought he was a self-made man. He had forgotten that I was the one who supplied the steel for his first major project, when no one else would extend him credit. He had forgotten that his signature was on documents that, if exposed, would not just bankrupt him, but would put him in federal prison for fraud. He had called my bloodline dirty. He had called my son a failure. I closed the ledger. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. I tucked the file under my arm and climbed back up the ladder. I wasn't just an old carpenter anymore. As I closed the hatch and began restacking the wood to hide the entrance, I felt a shift in my chest. Gus, the carpenter, was going to sleep. Augustus King was waking up, and he was very, very hungry for justice. The neon sign of the Midnight Diner flickered with a dying buzz, casting a sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement. It was 2 a.m. This was the kind of place where truck drivers stopped for caffeine, and regrets, not where business deals were made. But that was exactly why I chose it. In my world, the most dangerous conversations never happened in glass boardrooms. They happened in places where no one was looking. I sat in the back booth, the vinyl seat cracked and taped over with silver duct tape. In front of me was a plate of cold fries and a mug of black coffee that tasted like battery acid. I did not touch the food. I was feeding on something else tonight. Mitchell Stone walked through the door precisely 3 minutes early. He was the most feared corporate litigator in New York, a man who could dismantle a Fortune 500 company with a single memo. But tonight, he looked like a nervous intern. He was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost more than this entire building, and he kept glancing at the door as if he expected the FBI to burst in. He spotted me and hurried over, sliding into the booth opposite me. He didn't order. He didn't take off his coat. He simply placed a thick, leather-bound portfolio on the sticky table between us. "Good to see you," Augustus Mitchell said, his voice barely a whisper. "It has been a long time. You look different." I looked down at my flannel shirt and calloused hands. "I look like a man who has been retired, Mitchell. But retirement is over. Tell me what you found." Mitchell opened the portfolio. He skipped the pleasantries. He knew me too well. He spread out a series of spreadsheets, flowcharts, and bank statements. They were covered in red ink. It looked like a crime scene. "It is worse than we thought," Mitchell said, tapping a column of numbers. "Conrad Blackwood isn't just in debt. He is drowning. He is running a classic Ponzi scheme, but instead of investors, he is juggling construction loans. He borrows from Bank A to pay the interest on Bank B. Then he borrows from Bank C to pay the principal on Bank A. It is a house of cards, Augustus, and he is building it in the middle of a hurricane." I leaned in, studying the figures. The numbers told a story of desperation. Conrad was projecting an image of unimaginable wealth, but his liquidity was non-existent. "He is betting everything on the summit, isn't he?" I asked. Mitchell nodded grimly. "Yes, the Summit Tower. It is a $200 million project. He has leveraged every single asset he owns to secure the construction loan. His house, his cars, his existing properties, even his daughter's trust fund. If the summit isn't completed on time, or if the financing falls through before the grand opening, he loses everything. He will be on the street." I took a sip of the bitter coffee. 200 million. That is a lot of faith in a market that is slowing down. Who was foolish enough to lend him that kind of capital without doing due diligence? Mitchell paused. He looked at me with a strange expression. It was a mix of hesitation and awe. He shuffled a few papers and pulled out the primary loan agreement. That is the interesting part, sir. Conrad was rejected by every major bank in the city. His credit rating is artificially inflated, but the risk algorithms flagged him. So he went to the secondary market. He secured the funding through a private equity firm called North Star Ventures. North Star. I repeated the name. It sounded familiar. Mitchell continued. North Star is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. It specializes in high-risk, high-interest loans for distressed developers. Conrad thinks he is dealing with a group of faceless foreign investors. He thinks he outsmarted the system by getting money from people who don't ask questions. And I pushed. Mitchell took a deep breath. I dug into the ownership structure of North Star Ventures. It is a labyrinth of holding companies. But if you follow the paper trail all the way back to the source past the shell corporations and the nominees, North Star is wholly owned by a parent entity. He turned the final page over. At the top of the document, stamped in blue ink, was a logo I had designed myself 30 years ago. Kingston Holdings. The silence in the diner was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. I stared at the document. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Conrad Blackwood borrowed $200 million from me, I said softly. He doesn't know it is you, Mitchell added quickly. To him, Kingston Holdings is just a silent conglomerate. He has no idea that Augustus King, the carpenter he insulted, is the chairman of the board. He is paying interest to the very man he called a peasant. I sat back against the cracked vinyl. The irony was delicious. It was almost poetic. Conrad had built his masterpiece using my money. Every steel beam, every pane of glass, every marble tile in that tower belonged to me. He was living in my house, eating my food, and spitting in my face, all while I held the deed to his existence. So Mitchell said, closing the portfolio, "We have him. We can call the loan tomorrow. There is a clause in the contract. Clause 14B. It states that if the borrower's character or conduct negatively impacts the project's reputation, the lender has the right to demand immediate repayment of the full principal." Mitchell leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the kill. The incident at the school, the blacklist, the bribery. We have the recordings. We have the evidence. We can prove he is a reputational liability. We can trigger the clause at 9 a.m. tomorrow. He won't have the cash. He will default by noon. We can seize the construction site before he even finishes his lunch. We can stop him, Augustus. We can end this right now. I looked at the lawyer. He was right. I could crush Conrad Blackwood tomorrow. I could snap my fingers and turn his dreams into dust. It would be easy. It would be efficient. But it wouldn't be enough. "No," I said. Mitchell blinked. "No." "But sir, the risk. I don't want to stop him, Mitchell. Not yet." I looked out the window at the dark street. I thought about Leo sitting on that park bench. I thought about Toby crying in the principal's office. I thought about the $50,000 Conrad had thrown at me like I was a beggar. Immediate bankruptcy was too good for him. It was just a financial failure. I needed a moral failure. I needed total, absolute humiliation. If I pull the rug out now, I said, turning back to Mitchell, he will make excuses. He will blame the market. He will blame the banks. He will tell everyone he was a victim of bad timing. He will walk away with his ego intact. I clenched my fist on the table. I want him to finish the tower. I want him to build it all the way to the top. I want him to stand on the roof of the tallest building in the city and look down on everyone. I want him to feel like a god. I want him to invite the press. I want him to invite the city council. I want him to have his moment of glory. And then I whispered, leaning in close when he is standing at the very top, thinking he has won. That is when I will take the ground away. I want the fall to be so high that he never gets up again. Mitchell swallowed hard. He nodded slowly, understanding the cruelty of the plan. It wasn't business anymore. It was an execution. "So what do we do?" Mitchell asked. "Let the checks clear," I ordered. "Approve the next tranche of funding. Let him think he is safe. But I want you to prepare the foreclosure documents. Have them ready for the day of the grand opening." And Mitchell, "Yes, sir." "Get me an invitation to the gala. I want a front row seat when the king comes to collect his crown." Mitchell gathered the papers and slid them back into the portfolio. He looked at me with a newfound respect, or perhaps fear. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and nodded. "It will be done, Augustus." He walked out of the diner, disappearing into the night. I sat there for a moment longer, finishing my cold coffee. It didn't taste bitter anymore. It tasted like victory. Conrad Blackwood was building a monument to his own vanity, brick by brick. He didn't know that every brick he laid was just another weight around his neck. And I was the one holding the rope. I left a $20 bill on the table for a $2 coffee and walked out to my truck. The city was sleeping, but I was wide awake. The game had changed. I wasn't just defending my son anymore. I was hunting. Mitchell looked at me across the scarred table of the diner, his mouth slightly open. The neon light buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the documents that proved we owned Conrad Blackwood's life. Mitchell was a creature of the courtroom. He understood immediate victories. He understood the sharp, swift cut of a summary judgment. He did not understand the architecture of ruin. To him, crushing Conrad tomorrow was the logical play. It was safe. It was profitable. But I was not interested in profit. I was interested in a lesson that would echo for generations. "If we foreclose tomorrow," I said, leaning forward until I could see the reflection of my own eyes in Mitchell's glasses, "Conrad gets to play the victim. He will go to the press. He will tell them that the banks lost their nerve. He will say that small-minded accountants killed a visionary project. He will walk away with his arrogance intact, blaming the economy for his failure. He will still be the man who thinks he is better than my son." Mitchell frowned, tapping his pen on the leather portfolio. "So you want to risk the capital? You want to let him spend another $50 million of your money?" I nodded slowly. "I want you to approve the next tranche of funding immediately. Send the wire transfer at 9 a.m. Send him a congratulatory note. Tell him the board at Kingston Holdings is impressed with his progress. Feed his ego, Mitchell. Feed it until it is so bloated it can barely stand." I took a breath, visualizing the steel skeleton of the summit rising above the city skyline. I want that tower finished. I want the marble in the lobby polished. I want the gold lettering on the sign installed. I want Conrad to stand on the penthouse balcony, looking down at the city, believing that he has finally conquered it. I want him to feel the wind at the top, because the fall is only fatal if you are high enough. Mitchell slowly closed the folder. The confusion in his eyes was replaced by a cold understanding. He realized then that he wasn't working for a businessman. He was working for a father who had watched his son be discarded like trash. "And there is one more thing," I added. "Anything, Augustus. The grand opening gala is scheduled for next month. Conrad is going to invite the entire city. The mayor, the press, the investors. He is going to turn it into a coronation for the Blackwood name. I want to be there." Mitchell hesitated. But sir, if you walk in there—" "I won't walk in as Augustus King, the billionaire chairman," I interrupted. "Not at first. I want you to secure an invitation for Leo, and I want a +1. Conrad thinks I am a dusty old carpenter who cowers in a workshop. He thinks I am too ashamed to show my face in his world. I want to look him in the eye when the clock strikes 12. Mitchell stood up. He buttoned his jacket, his demeanor shifting from uncertainty to military precision. He picked up the portfolio, holding it like a weapon. "I will authorize the funds in the morning," Mitchell said. "Conrad will think he has won the lottery. He won't suspect a thing. Good, I said. Let him sleep well tonight. Let him dream of his tower. Mitchell turned and walked out of the diner, vanishing into the damp night air. I stayed in the booth for a moment longer. I imagined Conrad Blackwood in his mansion, probably drinking expensive scotch, laughing about how he had disposed of the King family. He didn't know that the money he was about to receive was not a lifeline. It was the rope he would use to hang himself. I finished my coffee, left a tip on the table, and walked out to my truck. The city was quiet, but I could hear the sound of hammers in my head. We were building a trap, and it was going to be a masterpiece. The courier truck that pulled up to my cabin the next afternoon was not a standard delivery vehicle. It was a black, unmarked van with tinted windows, the kind used to transport high-value art or sensitive legal documents. The driver stepped out, wearing a uniform so crisp it looked like it belonged on a Marine, not a messenger. He walked up the porch steps, ignoring the peeling paint on the railing, and handed me a package wrapped in velvet-textured paper. He did not ask for a signature. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving a lingering scent of expensive cologne in the fresh mountain air. I brought the package inside to the kitchen table, where Leo was trying to feed Toby a sandwich. The atmosphere in the house was brittle, like dry leaves ready to crumble. Leo looked up, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. He recognized the crest stamped in gold leaf on the front of the package immediately. It was the Blackwood family crest, a lion holding a sword, a symbol Conrad had paid a marketing firm $500,000 to design because his real family history was too boring to display. Leo's hands shook as he reached for it. He tore open the velvet wrapping to reveal a heavy cream-colored envelope and a thick legal binder. Inside the envelope was an invitation. It was printed on cardstock so thick it felt like a weapon. The text was embossed in silver ink. It requested, or rather commanded, the presence of Mr. Leo King and Mr. Augustus King at the grand opening gala of the Summit Tower. The dress code was black tie. The date was tomorrow night. "Why does he want us there?" Leo asked, his voice trembling. "He kicked me out. He hates you. Why would he invite us to his victory lap?" I didn't answer. I opened the legal binder. The first page made my blood run cold, not with fear, but with the recognition of pure evil. It was a custody agreement. But it wasn't a standard negotiation. It was a voluntary surrender of parental rights. It stated that Leo King, due to financial instability and personal unfitness, was relinquishing full legal and physical custody of Tobias King to his grandfather, Conrad Blackwood. Attached to the document was a smaller handwritten note on Conrad's personal stationery. Leo picked it up and read it aloud. His voice broke on every other word. The note read, "Leo, this is not a request. This is a script. You will attend the gala. You will walk the red carpet. You will smile. During the keynote speech, I will call you to the stage. You will sign this document in front of the press and the board of investors. We will frame it as a humanitarian act, a loving grandfather stepping in to save his grandson from a destitute father. You will thank me for my generosity." Leo dropped the note as if it had burned his fingers. He can't be serious. He wants me to give up my son on stage like it is some kind of reality TV show. "I won't do it, Dad. I won't go." I turned the page of the binder. There was more. Taped to the back of the agreement were photographs. Grainy, high-contrast photos taken with a long-range lens. They showed Leo sitting on that park bench 2 days ago, head in his hands, looking disheveled. They showed him arguing with the repo man in my driveway. But the context had been manipulated. The lighting made Leo look gaunt, sweating, frantic. Beneath the photos was a draft of a press release. The headline read, "Blackwood Air Tragedy, Architect Leo King Hospitalized for Opioid Addiction." Leo saw the headline and gasped. He grabbed the table for support. Drugs. I have never touched drugs in my life. I drink a glass of wine at Christmas. This is insane. I read the text of the blackmail. It claimed that Leo had been fired not for incompetence but because he was found using heroin in the office bathroom. It claimed that his financial ruin was due to a gambling addiction and drug debts. It cited anonymous sources. If you do not attend, the note continued, or if you refuse to sign on stage, this press release goes to the New York Times, the Post, and every architectural firm in the country at 8 a.m. the next morning. You will never work again. You will never pass a background check. And Child Protective Services will take Tobias anyway because no judge will leave a child with a homeless junkie. Leo collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. He has won, Dad. He has thought of everything. If I don't go, he destroys my reputation forever. If I do go, I lose my son. I have to sign it. Maybe if I sign it, he will let me see Toby on weekends. Maybe he will have mercy. I looked at my son broken by a man who used ink and paper as a bludgeon. Conrad Blackwood was a monster, but he was a predictable monster. He needed the gala to be perfect. He needed the public validation of being the savior. He didn't just want custody. He wanted the applause. He wanted to parade his victory in a tuxedo. I reached across the table and closed the binder. The snap of the metal rings was loud in the quiet kitchen. You are not signing anything, Leo. I said, my voice steady and low. Leo looked up, tears streaming down his face. What choice do I have? Did you see the photos? He will ruin me. He is bluffing. I lied. But it was a calculated lie. Conrad wasn't bluffing about the threat, but he was bluffing about his power. He thought he held all the cards. He didn't know I was the one who owned the table. We are going to the gala, I said, standing up. Leo stared at me in horror. You want me to walk into that trap? You want me to stand on stage and let him humiliate me? I walked over to the window and looked out at the trees. The wind was picking up, shaking the branches. We are going to the gala, I repeated. But we are not going as the victims he expects. He wants a show. We will give him a show. He wants you on stage, fine. You will stand on that stage. But you won't be signing away your son. You will be witnessing the demolition of a tyrant. I turned back to Leo. His fear was still there, but beneath it I saw a flicker of trust. He had nowhere else to turn. Get up, Leo. Wash your face. Conrad wants us in black tie. Then we need to look the part. We are going to the city. If he wants to invite the kings to his castle, he better be prepared for what happens when we walk through the door. The invitation is accepted. Leo was standing in the middle of the living room, holding a garment bag that smelled of mothballs and resignation. He unzipped it to reveal the suit he had worn to his college graduation 10 years ago. It was gray, slightly shiny at the elbows, and the cut was hopelessly outdated. He looked at it like a soldier inspecting a rusted rifle before heading to the front lines. It will have to do, Leo said, smoothing a wrinkle with his thumb. It is the only one Monica didn't donate to Goodwill when she cleared out my closet. If I keep the jacket buttoned, maybe no one will notice the stain on the lapel. I walked over and took the hanger from his hand. I didn't say a word. I simply walked to the wood stove and tossed the suit hanger and all onto the pile of kindling I had prepared for the evening fire. Dad, Leo shouted, lunging forward. What are you doing? That is my only suit. Not anymore, I said, blocking his path. You are not walking into that gala looking like a man who is apologizing for his existence. Conrad expects to see a victim. He expects to see a man in a cheap suit who is ready to beg. If you wear that, you have already lost the psychological war before you even step out of the car. But I have no money. Dada, Leo's voice cracked. A decent suit costs $1,000. I have $12 in my pocket. I grabbed my car keys from the hook. Good thing we aren't looking for a decent suit. We are looking for armor. Get in the truck. The drive into the city was quiet. Leo stared out the window, picking at his fingernails, terrified of the humiliation he was sure was coming. I didn't try to comfort him. Comfort is for the weak. He needed strength. We drove past the flashy department stores on Fifth Avenue, past the trendy boutiques with their loud music and glass facades. I turned down a quiet cobblestone street in the Tribeca district, a street that didn't look like it held any commerce at all. I parked the rusted Ford in front of a narrow building with a black lacquered door. There was no sign, no mannequin in the window, just a small brass plaque that read, Sartoria Rossi, established 1920. "Dad, this place looks closed," Leo said as we stepped out. "And it looks expensive." I pushed the door open. A bell chimed a soft, rich sound that seemed to absorb the noise of the street. The air inside smelled of steam wool and espresso. Rolls of fabric were stacked against the walls like ancient scrolls cashmere vicuna silk. Standing behind a cutting table was an elderly man with silver hair and a measuring tape draped around his neck like a rosary. He looked up, peering over his spectacles. His expression was stern, the look of a master craftsman who did not suffer fools. But when his eyes landed on me, the sternness evaporated. He dropped the chalk he was holding and rushed around the counter, his arms wide open. "Signore Augustus," he exclaimed, his Italian accent thick and warm. Giovanni I smiled, shaking his hand. "It has been a long time." "Too long," Giovanni said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "We thought you had moved to Italy. We haven't seen you since the merger." He paused, glancing at my flannel shirt and work boots, but his respect didn't waver for a second. He turned to Leo, who was standing by the door, looking confused and out of place. "And this must be the son," Giovanni said. "I see the jawline. He has the king jawline. He needs a suit, Giovanni. For tonight. Black tie." Giovanni clapped his hands. "Tonight, impossible. A Rossi suit takes 6 weeks. For anyone else, I say, go to Brooks Brothers. But for the chairman, oh. For you, we make miracles." Leo froze. He looked at the tailor, then at me. "Chairman." I stepped in before Giovanni could say more. Giovanni likes to exaggerate. "I used to chair the neighborhood bocce ball league." Giovanni looked at me, a twinkle in his eye. He knew the game. He knew that in this room, discretion was as important as the stitching. He winked at Leo. Yes, bocce ball. Your father was very aggressive with the heavy balls. Now come here. Let's see what we can do." For the next hour, Leo was spun, measured, and pinned. Giovanni worked with a speed that blurred the eye. He pulled a midnight blue tuxedo from a reserve rack, a prototype that had never been sold. He slipped the jacket onto Leo's shoulders. It wasn't just clothing. It was a transformation. The moment the fabric touched Leo's skin, his posture changed. The slouch of the defeated architect vanished. His shoulders squared. His chin lifted. The suit was cut to make him look taller, broader, dangerous. Giovanni stood back, admiring his work. "He looks like you, Augustus, from 30 years ago, before you decided to hide in the woods." Leo looked in the three-way mirror. He didn't recognize himself. He touched the lapel, feeling the silk. "Dad," he whispered, "I can't pay for this." I pulled out a black credit card from my wallet. It was made of titanium, heavy and cold. I hadn't used it in a decade. "It is not a gift, Leo," I said. "It is an investment. Conrad Blackwood is going to try to bury you tonight. I want you to be dressed for the funeral." His funeral. Giovanni took the card without looking at it. He began to wrap the suit in a garment bag that felt like velvet. As we walked to the door, Giovanni stopped me. "Signore Augustus," he said quietly, "if you are wearing the old tuxedo you left here for storage 10 years ago, I had it cleaned and pressed. Just in case." I nodded. "You always knew I would come back, didn't you?" "A king never stays in exile forever," Giovanni replied. We walked out into the cool afternoon air. Leo was carrying the suit like it was a holy relic. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in days. "Who are you, Dad?" he asked. "That tailor. He treated you like royalty. And that card." I opened the truck door. "I am just a man who knows the value of good construction, Leo. Now get in. We have a gala to crash. And I have a feeling the appetizers are going to taste much better when we own the building they are being served in." The lobby of the Summit Tower smelled of white lilies and unearned arrogance. It was a cavern of marble and gold leaf designed to intimidate anyone who walked through the revolving doors. As Leo and I stepped onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs from the hired photographers popped sporadically, blinding us for a moment. They weren't taking our picture because we were important. They were taking it because we were the evening's entertainment. We were the cautionary tale that Conrad had invited to make everyone else feel superior. Leo walked beside me. The midnight blue tuxedo from Giovanni fit him like a second skin. It changed the way he moved. He wasn't slouching. He was cutting through the air. But as we moved deeper into the crowd, I could feel the tension radiating off him. The room was filled with the city's plastic aristocracy, men in ill-fitting rental suits that cost too much, and women dripping in jewelry that was likely insured for more than their husband's net worth. They held champagne flutes like weapons, scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. When they saw us, the murmurs started. It began as a ripple near the entrance and spread like a virus through the crowd. I saw heads turn. I saw hands cover mouths to hide whispers that were meant to be heard. They didn't see two men in bespoke Italian tailoring. They saw the narrative Conrad had sold them. They saw the disgraced architect and his carpenter father crawling back to beg for scraps. Then the crowd parted. It wasn't out of respect. It was the kind of separation that happens when a predator enters the water. Monica approached us. She was wearing a red dress that was tight enough to cut off her circulation, and on her arm was Preston. I knew Preston. He was a hedge fund manager who had made his money shorting pharmaceutical stocks. He was the kind of man who thought loud meant right and expensive meant classy. "Leo," Monica said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that was more painful than a slap. "I didn't think you would actually come. You look thin. Are you eating?" She reached out and brushed invisible lint off Leo's shoulder, a gesture of ownership and pity. Leo stiffened but didn't pull away. "I am fine, Monica," Leo said, his voice steady. "We are here for the opening." Preston laughed. It was a barking sound. "The opening, buddy. You are here for the charity. Conrad told us you were having a hard time. He said something about personal struggles." Preston tapped his nose conspiratorially, a universal sign for drug use. The guests standing nearby leaned in their eyes, hungry for the scandal. Leo's jaw tightened. He started to speak to defend himself, but I stepped forward. I placed myself between my son and these vultures. "Good evening, Monica," I said. Monica looked at me, and her expression shifted from pity to pure disgust. She looked at my face weathered by 50 years of sun and wind. She looked at my hands, which were resting at my sides. Then she looked at my suit. Giovanni's work was subtle. It didn't scream brands. There were no logos. The fabric was a matte black vicuna wool that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. To the untrained eye, to the eye that only knew flashy labels, it looked plain. "Oh, Augustus." Monica sighed. "You came too. And you dressed up. That is adorable." Preston stepped in, emboldened by his fiancée's cruelty. He reached out and actually flicked the lapel of my tuxedo with his finger. "Nice try, old-timer," Preston sneered. "Where did you get this?" "The rental shop at the strip mall." "It is a bit boxy in the shoulders, isn't it? You know, for a black tie event you are supposed to wear wool, not... What is this polyester blend?" The circle of guests around us erupted in laughter. It was a sharp, brittle sound. They were laughing at a $10,000 suit because a man in a leased tuxedo told them it was cheap. They were laughing at the man who owned the debt on the building they were standing in. I looked at Preston. I looked at the cheap gold watch on his wrist, a gaudy thing that ticked too loudly. "It is comfortable," I said simply. "That is all that matters when you are doing heavy lifting." "Heavy lifting," Preston guffawed, looking around at his audience. "The only thing you are going to be lifting tonight is a pen, Gus, to sign those papers. Don't worry, Conrad has a nice pen for you to use. He wouldn't want you to get sawdust on the legal documents." Monica leaned in close to Leo, dropping her voice to a whisper that was meant to be intimate, but was loud enough for the front row to hear. "Leo, please. Look at your father. He doesn't belong here. You don't belong here anymore. Just sign the custody papers on stage. Let Conrad take care of Toby. It is the only way you can save face. Look at you. You are trying so hard to play dress-up, but everyone knows the truth. You are broke. You are broken. Just let it go." Leo looked at her. For a moment I thought he might break. The pressure in the room was immense. Hundreds of eyes were drilling into him, judging him, stripping him naked. But then Leo looked at me. He saw that I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't angry. I was looking at Preston and Monica the way a scientist looks at bacteria under a microscope. Leo turned back to Monica. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. "I like the suit, Monica," Leo said. "And I am keeping my son." Monica's smile faltered. Preston stepped forward, his face reddening. "Listen here, you loser. You think you have a choice? Conrad is going to destroy you up there. We were just trying to be nice, trying to give you an out. But if you want to do this the hard way, fine." Suddenly a hush fell over the room. The lights dimmed. A spotlight swept across the crowd and landed on the grand staircase. The orchestra swelled. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers. "Please welcome the visionary behind the summit, the man of the hour, Mr. Conrad Blackwood." Conrad appeared at the top of the stairs. He was wearing a white tuxedo jacket, looking every inch the savior he imagined himself to be. He raised his hands to the applause, soaking it in. He looked down at the crowd, his eyes scanning until they found us. He smiled. It was the smile of a predator who sees his prey trapped in the corner. Preston sneered at me one last time. "Showtime, Carpenter. Try not to embarrass us when you are up there." He and Monica turned and walked toward the stage, joining the applause. The crowd closed in around us, pushing us forward, herding us toward the slaughter. I adjusted my cufflinks. I felt the weight of the recorder in my pocket. I felt the cool titanium of my credit card. "Are you ready?" I asked Leo. Leo took a deep breath. He smoothed the front of his jacket. He looked at the stage where Conrad was beaming. "I am ready, Dad," Leo said. "Let's go inspect the foundation." We walked through the jeering crowd, heads high, moving toward the light. They thought we were walking to our execution. They had no idea we were the demolition crew. The ballroom fell into a hushed reverence as the lights dimmed, leaving only Conrad Blackwood illuminated by a single piercing spotlight. He stood at the podium, gripping the sides with hands that had never held a shovel, looking out at the sea of faces like a monarch surveying his subjects. Behind him, a massive screen projected a digital rendering of the summit tower, its golden spire piercing the clouds, a phallic monument to his own ego. He leaned into the microphone, his voice smooth and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, letting the silence hang for effect. "We live in an era of mediocrity. We live in a time where the world tries to tell us that everyone is equal, that every effort is the same, that pedigree does not matter. But look around this room. Look at the person standing next to you. You know the truth. You know that civilization is not built by the masses. It is constructed by the architects of destiny. It is guided by the few. The elite." He paused to let the applause wash over him. I stood in the shadows at the back of the room, my hand resting on Leo's shoulder. I could feel my son trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer toxicity of the words. Conrad was not just giving a speech. He was justifying his cruelty. He was telling the room that destroying my son was not a crime but a necessity of natural selection. The summit is not just a building, Conrad continued, his voice rising with theatrical passion. It is a sanctuary for those of us who understand the value of legacy. It is a fortress for those with the bloodlines strong enough to bear the weight of history. We do not let just anyone into our circle. We protect our own. We protect our standards. Because if you dilute the blood, you dilute the future. The crowd erupted in cheers. They clapped for their own exclusion. They clapped for the idea that they were better than the people serving them drinks. It was sickening. It was a room full of people celebrating a man who was morally bankrupt, unaware that he was financially bankrupt too. Conrad held up a hand to silence them. But a vision this grand requires partners who share our DNA. Partners who understand that true wealth is quiet, powerful, and enduring. For the past 6 months, I have been working with a private equity group that represents the very pinnacle of global finance. They saw the potential of the summit when the local banks were too short-sighted to understand. He gestured to a small table on the side of the stage where a single contract lay waiting next to a gold pen. Tonight, we make history. Tonight, we secure the funding that will carry the Blackwood name into the next century. I am honored to invite the chairman of Kingston Holdings to the stage to finalize our partnership. The orchestra began to play a triumphant swell. The spotlight swept across the room, searching for the mysterious investor. Conrad shielded his eyes, looking into the darkness, a confident smile plastered on his face. He expected a stranger. He expected a faceless suit from the Cayman Islands. He expected a check. I squeezed Leo's shoulder one last time. "It is time," I whispered. I stepped out of the shadows and into the aisle. The spotlight swung wildly, and then, as if guided by fate, it locked onto me. The beam was blinding, but I didn't blink. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs, and I began the long walk toward the stage. The applause faltered. The music didn't stop, but the clapping died down, replaced by a ripple of confused murmurs. They saw the carpenter. They saw the man they had mocked in the lobby. They didn't understand why the help was walking toward the microphone. Conrad's smile froze. He squinted, trying to see through the glare. He laughed nervously into the mic. "It seems we have a confused guest. Security, if you could just—" I didn't stop. I walked with the heavy rhythmic gait of a man who has walked on steel beams 1,000 feet in the air. I climbed the stairs to the stage. The sound of my boots on the wood echoed through the silent room. I walked past the security guards who were too stunned to move. I walked right up to the podium until I was standing inches from Conrad Blackwood. The microphone picked up his ragged breath. "Gus!" He hissed, his voice off mic, but audible to everyone in the front row. "What the hell are you doing? Get off my stage before I have you arrested." I reached into my inner pocket. Conrad flinched, perhaps thinking I had a weapon. In a way, I did. I pulled out a heavy titanium fountain pen. "I believe you invited me, Conrad," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the speakers, without me even leaning in. "You called for the chairman of Kingston Holdings." I turned to the audience, looking at the hundreds of stunned faces, looking at Monica, who had dropped her champagne glass, looking at Preston, whose mouth was hanging open. "I am Augustus King, founder and sole owner of Kingston Holdings, and I am here to discuss the terms of your surrender." The walk from the edge of the stage to the podium was only 20 feet, but it felt like crossing a canyon. Every step I took was accompanied by the sound of muffled laughter. To the hundreds of people in that ballroom, I was the evening's comic relief. I was the uninvited guest, the dusty relic from a bygone era, trying to crash a party for the gods of industry. I could hear their whispers. They called me a senile old man. They called me a sad spectacle. They wondered if I had gotten lost on my way to the service entrance. I did not rush. I let the heavy thud of my boots on the hollow wooden stage echo through the room. I kept my eyes locked on Conrad Blackwood. He was smiling, but it was a tight, brittle smile. His eyes were darting to the security guards in the wings, signaling them to hold back. He wanted to savor this. He thought I was coming up there to beg. He thought I was finally going to kneel. When I reached the podium, the spotlight was blinding. It was hot on my face, stripping away the shadows, exposing every wrinkle and every scar. Conrad leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with fake benevolence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, chuckling softly, "it seems my son-in-law's father has decided to join us. Perhaps he wants to say a few words about gratitude before we sign the papers. Or maybe he is just looking for the open bar." The crowd roared with laughter. It was a cruel, ugly sound. Conrad leaned away from the mic, his face inches from mine. The smile vanished. "You senile old fool," he hissed, his breath smelling of champagne and malice. "What are you doing? If you are not here to sign the custody surrender, get the hell off my stage. You are embarrassing yourself." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip. I looked at the fear hiding behind his arrogance. He was terrified that I would make a scene, but he had no idea what kind of scene I was about to make. "I am here to sign, Conrad," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when I told a foreman that a wall wasn't plumb and had to be torn down. Conrad blinked. He looked surprised, then relieved. He gestured to the small table beside the podium where the custody agreement lay waiting. "Well then," he said, raising his voice for the audience again, "it takes a big man to admit when he is beaten. Please, Gus. The pen is right there. Sign the papers. Give Tobias the future he deserves." He held out a gold-plated pen, offering it to me like a king offering a bone to a dog. I took the pen. It felt light, cheap, flashy on the outside, hollow on the inside, just like the man holding it. I walked over to the table. The camera flashes went off in a frenzy. This was the money shot. The moment the working-class grandfather surrendered his bloodline to the elite. I looked down at the custody papers. I saw Leo's name. I saw Toby's name. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my tuxedo. The room went quiet. I pulled out a single crisp document. It was bound in blue legal paper. I placed it directly on top of the custody agreement, covering it completely. "What is that?" Conrad whispered, stepping closer. "A thank you note." I uncapped the pen. I looked out at the audience. I saw Leo standing in the front row, his head held high. I saw Monica covering her mouth. I saw the investors waiting for their check. "I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding," I said into the microphone. The sound system carried my voice to every corner of the room. Conrad Blackwood invited the chairman of Kingston Holdings to the stage to sign the financing agreement. I paused. Conrad looked confused. He looked around the room. "Yes," he said, impatient. "We are waiting for him." "Where is he?" I turned to Conrad. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. "He is standing right in front of you." Conrad froze. He looked at me, then at the document on the table, then back at me. He tried to process the words, but his brain refused to accept them. "You," he laughed nervously. "You are a carpenter, Gus. You fix chairs. Stop playing games." I looked down at the document. It wasn't a check. It was a notice of default and immediate foreclosure. "I founded Kingston Holdings 30 years ago. Conrad," I said, my voice echoing like thunder. "I built it with the same hands you called dirty. I built it while you were still borrowing money from your father to buy sports cars." I signed the document. The scratch of the pen was the loudest sound in the world. And as the sole owner of the debt on this building, I continued, "I am officially calling in your loan. You have violated Clause 14B regarding the reputational conduct of the borrower. By blackmailing my son and slandering my grandson, you have proven yourself unfit to manage this asset. I capped the pen and tossed it onto the table. It rolled off and hit the floor with a metallic clatter. I am not here to give you money, Conrad. I am here to take my building back. Conrad's face went white, a deadly, ghostly white. He grabbed the document, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. He read the header. He read the signature. Augustus King, Chairman. No, he gasped. This is impossible. You are a nobody. I leaned into the microphone one last time. I am the man who owns the ground you are standing on. And you have exactly 1 hour to vacate my property before the locks are changed. The room erupted. But this time they weren't laughing. The silence in the ballroom was not the respectful silence of an audience listening to a speech. It was the terrified silence of a room full of people realizing they were standing on a trapdoor that had just swung open. Conrad Blackwood stood frozen next to me. His face, usually so composed for the cameras, was twitching. He looked at the foreclosure notice in his hand as if it were a venomous snake that had just bitten him. I did not let him speak. I did not let him recover. I leaned back into the microphone, my hands gripping the podium, not with the desperation of a beggar, but with the ownership of a landlord. You all laughed when I walked up these stairs. I began, my voice calm, deep, and resonating off the gilded walls. You saw an old man with calloused hands, and you thought I was the help. You thought I was dirt. And in a way you were right. I am dirt. I am the dirt that you dig up to pour a foundation. I am the dirt that supports the concrete. Without men like me, men like Conrad have nowhere to stand. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the bankers who had rejected Leo. I saw the headmaster who had expelled Toby. I saw the socialites who had mocked my suit. My name is Augustus King. For 30 years I have operated in the shadows. I built the bridges you drive on to get to your summer homes. I laid the fiber optic cables that carry your stock trades. I poured the runways for your private jets. I did not need my name on a building to know my worth. I knew it every time I cashed a check that your banks were too scared to write. I turned slowly to Conrad. He was shrinking, physically shrinking. You talk about legacy, Conrad. You talk about pedigree. You told my son that he was not worthy of this building because he had the soul of a laborer. You said he lacked the vision to understand true luxury. I stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage, pointing a finger at the massive support columns that lined the room. Let us talk about vision. Let us talk about this building that you are so proud of. You see gold leaf and Italian marble. I see a death trap. The crowd gasped. Conrad lunged forward. Stop him! Cut the mic! But the sound engineer did not move. He was staring at me. Everyone was staring at me. I walked back to the mic. I walked through your lobby tonight, Conrad. I checked your specs. You imported Carrara marble for the floors, costing $300 a square foot. But to pay for it, you switched the structural steel in the sub-basement, from grade A American steel to cheap recycled alloy from a supplier that has been flagged for safety violations 3 times this year. Conrad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I tapped the podium. You installed a gold-plated HVAC system to impress the investors, but you routed the intake vents through the parking garage to save on ductwork. That means in 5 years, everyone on the upper floors will be breathing carbon monoxide every time a car starts. You call that luxury, I call that a lawsuit. I pointed to the ceiling, to the massive crystal chandelier hanging above the guests. And that chandelier. It weighs 2 tons. You anchored it into a decorative plaster ceiling because you didn't want to wait for the structural mounts to arrive. You put aesthetics over safety. You put your ego over human lives. That is the difference between a builder and a con man. A builder respects the materials. A con man just wants them to look shiny long enough to cash the check. The crowd began to back away from the center of the room, looking up at the chandelier with horror. Conrad was shaking now. "Liar!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You are lying! This is slander! I will sue you for everything you have. Sue me," I asked, reaching into my pocket again. "With what money?" "You don't have any money, Conrad. You have debt. And as of 5 minutes ago, you don't even have a lawyer." I pulled out the small black voice recorder. It looked like a toy in my large hand. "You wanted to talk about bloodlines. You wanted to talk about who is fit to raise a child. You told this room that you were saving my grandson from a destitute father. You painted yourself as a saint." I held the recorder up to the microphone. "Let us hear what the saint says when he thinks no one is listening." I pressed play. The sound was crystal clear, amplified by $1 million sound system. Conrad's voice filled the room, harsh and cruel. "I own the judges. I own the bank. I crushed him because I had to. It was a mercy killing for his career." The crowd murmured. Monica put her hands over her mouth. But the recording wasn't finished, and the boy my voice on the tape asked. "The boy is a prop," Conrad's recorded voice sneered. "Tobias is half peasant. I don't care about him. I care about the photo op. Once I have custody, I will ship him off to boarding school in Switzerland. I don't want a crying brat ruining my penthouse. He is just leverage to get Leo out of the picture." Click. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. I put the recorder back in my pocket. I looked at Monica. She was staring at her father as if she was seeing a stranger. The man she had obeyed, the man she had sacrificed her marriage for, had just admitted that her son was nothing more than a prop to him. I looked at Preston. The hedge fund manager was slowly backing away, trying to distance himself from the blast radius. "And there is one more thing," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. "You mentioned you own the judges. You mentioned you bribed the school board." I gestured to the back of the room. The heavy double doors swung open. Mitchell Stone walked in. But he wasn't alone. Behind him were 4 officers from the district attorney's office wearing windbreakers that said Major Crimes Division. "My attorney, Mitchell Stone, has been very busy this week," I said. "He delivered copies of this recording, along with your fraudulent loan applications and your bribery ledger to the state prosecutor this morning. It seems they were very interested in how you managed to get building permits for a tower that violates 18 different safety codes." Conrad saw the police. His legs gave out. He slumped against the podium, gripping it to stay upright. The arrogance drained out of him like water from a cracked vase. He looked old. He looked small. "You can't do this," he whispered, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. "I am Conrad Blackwood. I am a pillar of this city." "You are a termite, Conrad," I corrected him. "And the exterminators are here." I turned my back on him. I looked down at the front row. Leo was standing there. He was crying, but he was smiling. He looked at me with a pride that washed away every second of pain from the last week. I walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me again. But this time they didn't move out of disgust. They moved out of fear. They moved out of respect. They looked at my hands, my work boots, my simple face, and they realized they had made a terrible mistake. They had judged the book by its cover, and now the book was closing on them. I stopped in front of Leo. "Come on, son," I said loud enough for Monica to hear. "Let's go get Toby. We have a lot of work to do. We have to tear this rot down and build something real." Leo nodded. He turned to Monica. She took a step toward him, her hand reaching out. "Leo." Leo didn't even blink. He turned his back on her and walked away with me. Behind us, I heard the sound of handcuffs clicking. I heard Conrad screaming that it was a mistake. I heard the flashbulbs popping, capturing the image of the great Conrad Blackwood being dragged off his own stage. But I didn't look back. A king doesn't look back at the ruins. He looks forward to the next build. The ballroom descended into chaos, not with a scream, but with the frantic rustle of silk and the aggressive tapping of smartphone screens. The illusion of Conrad Blackwood's empire did not just crack. It pulverized instantly under the weight of the truth. I stood still, an island of calm in a sea of panic, watching the dominoes fall exactly as I had calculated. The investors, men who had been sipping champagne and laughing at my tuxedo 5 minutes ago, were now swarming the stage like rats fleeing a sinking ship. A banker from Goldman Sachs, a man I recognized from the financial news, pushed his way through the crowd, his face purple with rage. He grabbed Conrad by the lapel of his white dinner jacket, ripping the expensive fabric. He screamed about collateral, about secured loans, demanding to know where his $20 million had gone if the building belonged to me. Another investor, a woman dripping in diamonds, was yelling into her phone, ordering her broker to dump Blackwood stock before the market opened, though we all knew it was already too late. The stock was not just going to dip, it was going to zero. Conrad tried to back away, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender, but there was nowhere to go. The walls he had built to keep the common people out were now locking him in with the wolves he had invited for dinner. Then came the heavy, authoritative sound of boots on marble. The double doors at the back of the room swung open again, and this time the blue windbreakers of the Major Crimes Division moved through the crowd with the efficiency of a demolition crew. They did not care about the net worth of the guests. They pushed past the hedge fund managers and the socialites, heading straight for the podium. Conrad saw them. His eyes bulged. He tried to run toward the wings of the stage, but Mitchell Stone stepped out from behind a curtain, blocking his path with a folded arms and a grim smile. Mitchell didn't say a word. He just nodded to the officers. 2 detectives grabbed Conrad's arms. They didn't handle him gently. They spun him around and slammed him against the podium he had just used to preach about his superiority. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was sharp and final, cutting through the din of the room. Conrad was screaming something about a mistake, about knowing the mayor, but the mayor was already sneaking out the side exit, covering his face with a program to avoid the cameras. I turned my gaze away from the stage to the front row. I wanted to see the other pillar of this crumbling temple fall. Monica was standing alone. Her face was pale, her makeup streaked with tears of shock. She turned to Preston, her fiancé, the man who had flicked my lapel and called me a loser. She reached out for his arm, looking for stability, looking for a savior. "Preston," she sobbed, "do something. Call your lawyers. Help my father." Preston took a step back. He looked at Monica not with love, but with the cold, calculating assessment of an asset manager looking at a toxic liability. He unhooked her hand from his arm as if she were contagious. "Help him," Preston laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Monica, are you stupid? Your father just admitted to fraud on a live microphone. The feds are seizing everything. The house, the cars, the trust funds. You are destitute. But we are getting married next month," Monica pleaded, her voice rising in hysteria. "We are partners." Preston adjusted his cufflinks, smoothing his suit. "That was before I knew your inheritance was negative $200 million. I manage risk, Monica. I don't marry it." He turned his back on her without a second glance. He pulled out his phone, already dialing his publicist, to spin the story of how he was a victim of the Blackwood fraud. He walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Monica standing in the center of the ruin she had helped create. She looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but there were none. The friends she had bought with her father's money were gone. The status she had worshipped was gone. She was just a woman in a red dress, alone in a room full of enemies. She looked at Leo. For a second, her eyes held a flicker of hope, a silent plea for the husband she had discarded to save her. But Leo was not looking at her. He was looking at his son's future, and she was no longer part of the blueprint. The chain reaction was complete. The foundation was rotten, and the house had fallen. The party was over, but the music of justice was just beginning to play. The orchestra had stopped, replaced by the dissonant rhythm of police radios, and the frantic murmurs of a crowd, witnessing a public execution of character. I watched as the officers began to lead Conrad away, but he was not going quietly. The man who had spent his life stepping on others was finally realizing that the ground had disappeared beneath him. He fought against the grip of the detectives, thrashing with a desperate, animalistic energy. His white tuxedo jacket was torn at the shoulder, hanging off him like a shed skin. He wasn't looking at the police. He wasn't looking at the lawyers. He was looking at me. "Gus," he screamed, his voice raw and cracking. "Gus, tell them to stop. We can make a deal. I still have assets. I know people, don't let them take me like this." The officers forced him toward the exit. But as they passed where I stood, Conrad's legs finally gave out. He didn't just stumble. He collapsed. He fell to his knees on the marble floor. He had bragged about the cold, hard stone that he had bought with stolen money. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide-rimmed with red, filled with the terror of a man who sees the abyss for the first time. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling, trying to grab the hem of my trousers. "Please, Gus," he sobbed, the arrogance completely gone, replaced by a pathetic sniveling. "We go back 30 years. I helped you get your start. I gave you contracts. You can't destroy me like this, not in front of everyone. I am Conrad Blackwood. I am your family." I looked down at him. I looked at the man who had called my grandson dirty. I looked at the man who had tried to erase my son's existence. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I only felt the cold clarity of a job well done. I signaled to the officers to wait for a moment. The room went deadly silent. Everyone wanted to hear the final verdict. I stepped closer until the toe of my work boot was inches from his expensive, polished knees. "You are confused, Conrad," I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. "You think I did this to you. You think this is my revenge." I shook my head slowly. "I did not destroy you. I didn't have to. You built this destruction yourself, brick by brick, lie by lie. Every time you cut a corner, every time you bribed an official, every time you looked in the mirror and told yourself you were a god, you were mixing the concrete for your own tomb." Conrad stared at me, his mouth opening and closing breathless. "You stood on a tower of cards and called it a kingdom," I continued. "You thought you were flying, but you were just falling in slow motion. I didn't push you, Conrad. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see you hitting the ground." I leaned in, delivering the final blow, not with a shout, but with a whisper. "You called me a janitor once. You meant it as an insult. You said I was only good for cleaning up messes." I straightened up, adjusting my cufflinks. "Well, you were right. I am a cleaner. And I just finished the biggest cleanup job of my life. I swept the trash out of my family's future." Conrad slumped forward, defeated, his forehead resting on the cold floor. He had no more words. He had no more lies. The truth had finally crushed him. "Take him away," I said to the officers. As they hauled him to his feet and dragged him out the double doors, the flashing lights of the police cruisers painting the ballroom in strokes of red and blue, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Leo. He wasn't looking at Conrad. He was looking at me. "Is it over?" Leo asked quietly. I looked at the empty stage. I looked at the ruined gala. I looked at the empire that had crumbled in less than an hour. "No, Leo," I said, turning toward the exit. "The demolition is over. Now we start the construction." We walked out into the night, leaving the wreckage behind us. The air outside was cold and clean. It smelled of rain and wet pavement. It smelled like a fresh start. Conrad Blackwood was history. But the Kings, we were just breaking ground. The gold letters spelling Blackwood were removed from the facade of the tower 3 weeks ago. It took a crane and a crew of 4 men only 6 hours to dismantle what Conrad had spent a lifetime trying to build. In its place, there is no name. The building is simply called the Summit. It belongs to the city now, not to an ego. I walked into the penthouse office on a Tuesday morning. The velvet ropes were gone. The pretension was stripped away. The air smelled of coffee and fresh blueprints, not fear. Leo sat behind the desk that used to be Conrad's throne. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a white dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, reviewing a stack of schematics for a new community center in the Bronx. He had kept the staff Conrad wanted to fire. He had paid the contractors Conrad had tried to cheat. He was rebuilding the firm's reputation, not with flash, but with integrity. When he saw me, he didn't stand up to bow. He just smiled. It was the smile of a man who finally owns his own skin. "Hey, Dad," Leo said. "We just got the occupancy permit for the residential floors, and I signed the union contract for the maintenance crew. Fair wages for everyone." I nodded. "Good. A building stands on its workers, Leo. Never forget that." The door opened and Toby ran in. He was wearing his school uniform, but his blazer was thrown over his shoulder and his tie was loose. He wasn't the scared little boy hiding behind a suitcase anymore. He had been re-enrolled in school, not St. Benedict's, but a school that valued character over checkbooks. Grandpa Toby shouted, running to give me a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. He pulled a wooden block out of his backpack. It was a rough, uneven carving of a bird that we had worked on together in the shop last weekend. "I showed it to the class today." Toby beamed. "It was show and tell." "Oh," I asked, ruffling his hair. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them my grandpa is the king of infrastructure," Toby said proudly. "But I told them the coolest thing is that you can make a bird out of a log." Julian Thorne tried to make fun of it. He said his dad bought him a drone. But the other kids thought the bird was way cooler because I made it with my own hands. Leo looked at me and winked. Toby climbed onto the couch and started drawing on a piece of scrap paper. I looked at my son. He was the CEO of a billion-dollar asset, but he was home every night for dinner. He was tired, but he was free. We hadn't just saved the money. We had saved the soul of the family. The toxic vine had been cut, and the tree was finally getting enough light to grow. I left the office around noon. I didn't take the limousine. I took my truck. I drove out of the city, watching the skyline fade in the rearview mirror. I had conquered that city. I had brought its false idols to their knees. But as the steel gave way to trees, I felt the weight lifting off my shoulders. The war was over. The soldiers could go home. Back in my workshop, the silence is different now. It is not the silence of hiding. It is the silence of peace. I pick up a piece of rough oak. It is stubborn wood. Hard to work with. It resists the blade. But that is what makes it valuable. I run the hand plane over the surface. Shk, shk. The sound is rhythmic, hypnotic. The shavings curl up like ribbons of gold falling to the concrete floor. This is where I belong. Not in the boardroom, but here revealing the beauty that hides beneath the rough exterior. I think about Conrad Blackwood often. Not with anger, but with a strange kind of pity. He spent his whole life trying to prove he was special. He thought bloodline was about who your ancestors were. He thought it was about blue veins and old money and names on libraries. He didn't understand that blood is just biology until you spill it for something you love. I stop planing and run my hand over the smooth wood. True nobility isn't found in a bank account. It isn't found in a country club membership. It is found in the sweat you drop to protect your children. It is found in the calluses on your hands. It is found in the courage to stand between your family and the wolves, even when you are terrified. Conrad wanted to be a king, but he forgot that a king's first duty is to serve, not to rule. He wanted the crown, but he couldn't handle the weight. I am Augustus King. The world knows me as the billionaire who dismantled a fraud in 10 minutes. But to the only two people who matter, I am just Dad. I am just Grandpa. And that is the only title I ever wanted. The sun is setting through the workshop window, casting long shadows across the floor. The dust motes dance in the light. I pick up the chisel. There is still work to do. There is always work to do. And as long as I have breath in my lungs and strength in my hands, I will build. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you have ever had to stand up for your family against someone who thought they were better than you, let me know in the comments below. Do you think I was too hard on Conrad? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? I read every single comment. And if you believe that true value comes from hard work and not inheritance, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I have many more stories to tell, and trust me, the files in my basement are far from empty. Until next time, remember, the tallest towers are built on the deepest foundations. Stay strong.